welcome you to the Historical Society of Lake Worth's series for this fall. We're just starting kind of late this year, but here we are. And we have an old friend back that we're really excited about her research. Those of you who have heard Ginger Pedersen before know that you're in for a treat tonight. Ginger was born in Florida.
In Lake Worth.
Raised on stories of the pioneer days. Her family has been here since 1950, and they operated the famous Africa USA theme park down south of us. Ginger's books are about interesting people, usually Floridians and women, which she explores, uncovers various archival stories, family papers and newspapers. She's a great researcher. She's written and co-authored award-winning books focused on various aspects of Palm Beach County history. Pioneering Palm Beach told the unknown story of Birdsville Dewey. Cristobal Chronicles tracks the life of a murdering poet and postmistress Selena Clark, which was quite an exciting presentation. So now, tonight, her newest book, and the subject of her talk is Unbreakable Healer, the story of Mabel E. Elliott, see her name up here, pioneering physician and medical missionary from a local family in Turkey and Armenia. And Ginger promises us some surprises and some known figures in her presentation.
Yeah, there's a surprise.
There you go. And so the Amazon website says this: the fearless service from battlefields post-war Turkey to the orphanages of Armenia and the hospitals of Japan. She saved millions of lives, thousands of lives. Dr. Elliott bore witness to some of the 20th century's greatest humanitarian crises, and she was a person of resilience with an amazing spirit, which is a quality we need today.
Yes, we do.
So we very much appreciate your timely talk.
Great.
Ginger, please.
Okay. So, a very interesting person that I stumbled across. Like I do most of my stories, I always say, they find me. And they found me on Facebook. You know, the cesspool of the universe actually can have some good qualities. And this was one. And so I'm scrolling through Facebook, and there's a one called Palm Beach is Remembered. It's like, a group. And this guy, Mike Welburn, posted a picture of Dr. Elliott and said, she lived in our cottage when she was an older person, and that she had saved his father's life in Japan. And I was like, wow, and that she was the most amazing woman he'd ever met. And I was like, okay, I've never heard of her. So I started to pull some articles, and this was back in 2018. So I pulled some things at that time, and I thought, this is a very intriguing story, but this is not going to be a quick write. This is going to take some time. So I said, okay, when I have time, I will start. Well, I had time starting last year. For some reason, I said, I got to get back to that Elliott story. And I already had started another book. But when I got back into this research, the other book now is still sitting, waiting to be even started, because this story just so intrigued me. And so really touched me on different levels. That it's one of the things that I've often wondered about is how she just didn't go crazy with all the things that she saw and that she did in our world, and how capable we are of humans of wonderful things, and how capable we are of absolute cruelty. It's a real stark thing. So, who was this person, Mabel Elliott? Well, her family history was the first thing that proved to be extremely interesting. So her parents met in India. Her father was a British soldier, and her mother was the daughter of a British soldier. And her mother was 14 when they married. And he was 25. So we're like, okay. They started having children. They had 6 children in India, one of which died as a baby. So by later, at 1875-ish, somewhere around there, he was assigned back to England. So they sailed back to England with their 5 children in a little, compartment. And they get back there, and, well, they're not done having children. They had 6 more. Whoa. So one of the babies died there, and it was there that Mabel Evelyn Elliott was born in 1881. So her father and mother were like, you know, this English weather is not nice. It's cold, it's clammy. We liked the warmth that we had in India. Where could we go where all our children would have more opportunity and we would have nice weather? Well, what does that sound like? Sounds like Florida. So off they sailed in 1883 when Mabel was but 2. They landed in New York, they took the train to Florida, and they were in North Florida in San Mateo, and they were going to do an orange grove, like everybody was going to do an orange grove. Little did they remember that it takes about 7 years to get any money out of an orange grove. So when you got that many kids, and guess what? She had 3 more children here in Florida. So they had a total of 14 children in the family, but in St. Augustine is where they carried on to. Their 19-year-old daughter died. I don't know of what, but she was desperately ill. That's all it said in the newspaper. So I think that was quite a blow to the family. So her father was always looking for greener pastures. And he got a job with someone you've heard of, Henry Flagler. His job was to feed all the men building the railroad from Titusville to this brand new town called West Palm Beach and Palm Beach. And he was also going to feed all the hotel builders building the Hotel Royal Poinciana. So Mabel was 13 when she came to West Palm Beach, and you see pointed there the little arrow to the Elliott House. That is the oldest known photograph of the panorama of West Palm Beach. And you can see it's not a lot to brag about. It's a lot of wooden shacks, most of which burned down in 1896.
Trees.
Yeah, there was a thick forest of sand pines in the back, and you see that on that photo. But there's not a lot to West Palm Beach. And there was a problem. With all those kids, West Palm Beach had no high school. And every one of the Elliott daughters ended up graduating high school, which was very unusual for the time. So the family, he saw greener pastures somewhere else. He actually was the chairman of the committee that formed the town of West Palm Beach in 1894, and he lost the mayor's election by 2 votes. Otherwise, he would have been the first mayor. So in about 1897, he went to Mexico with one of his older sons to run a hotel there, and his wife took the younger children to St. Augustine to go to high school. But one child didn't go to St. Augustine, and that was Mabel. Instead, she went to Albany, New York to live with the oldest child, a sister named Grace. And she attended a very high-end girls' high school called St. Agnes because she wanted to be a doctor. Now today it's not a lot for us to think of if you have a younger female relative, a young woman who, oh, I'm going to be a doctor. You're like, hey, great, you don't think much of it. It was very radical then. Less than 5% of all doctors at that time were women. So for her to want to do that and to have her family support, that's the second part, because they absolutely supported it, was very, very monumental. So her sister, who was 15 years older than she was seeing what she was learning and helping her with, you had to know a foreign language, and her sister was fluent in French because her husband was from France. She said, wait a minute, if my little sister can be a doctor, why can't I? So they both started to apply to medical schools around the country, and not a lot of them took women. But they were finally accepted at a medical school in Chicago, who had just started taking women students in 1901, and that was Rush Medical College, which is still around. And they were accepted in that class. Only 10 women were accepted among the 150 men. And they got in. And they both finished. And these are their graduation photos. You see M.E. Elliott and then her sister Grace Pappas. And when I got these photos from Rush Medical, now University, they didn't know they were sisters. They're like, they were sisters? There was only 3 women who graduated in that class of 105 doctors. So her sister Grace stayed in Chicago and opened a medical practice, but Dr. Elliott carried on to Michigan, specifically to a little town called Coloma and to another town, a bigger town called Benton Harbor in southwest Michigan. You may not have heard of it, but it's actually where Whirlpool is still headquartered. If you know Whirlpool Appliances, that's where they started, in Benton Harbor. So she was, she did everything a doctor did, which meant everything, right? She did surgery, she did birth babies, she stitched you up, she, cured your cough, whatever. You didn't have specialists, you just did everything. And that's what she did. And she did that for many years. She was the first woman who was president of their county medical association. So, she was showing some leadership abilities. She had ties here to Lake Worth. Her brother, Joe, ran a hotel here in Lake Worth, a 3-story hotel that was across the street from the Gulf Stream. And that's now where the Family Dollar is. This hotel was demolished, which we'll see later. So she would very often come in the wintertime and spend time at her brother's hotel. And several family members worked there as well. But in 1914, a world event happened, and that was the beginning of World War I, which they called the Great War. They didn't call it World War I. And she wanted to serve in the Army, but women were not allowed. They did not take women doctors in the U.S. Army. So she volunteered with the Red Cross as well as her sister. And then in 1917, the United States entered the war. And in 1918, her sister was actually called up by the Red Cross to serve in France. This was in October of 1918. So you know what happened a month later? The war was over. So her sister's plans were canceled. Her orders were canceled. And Dr. Elliott thought, well, I guess I'm not going overseas. And she wanted to so do that to kind of relive in a way her father's life of overseas service. So she gets a letter, a special delivery letter while she's here in West Palm Beach with her parents at their house, saying you have been selected for a different region, not Europe, but a region that used to be called, and it's an old term, the Near East. And those are the countries of Turkey, Armenia, and Greece. So if your mother or grandmother ever talked about the starving Armenians, that's who was going to be served. And there were 3 big aid organizations involved in these efforts. So in 1915, there had been a genocide, the first one of the 20th century. 1.5 million Christian Armenians were killed. And left behind were thousands of orphans. So these organizations, Near East Relief, which was a lot of philanthropists and very wealthy people and common Americans who contributed. You had American Women's Hospitals, which was a band of women doctors who got together and said, well, if we can't serve in the Army, we'll make our own hospitals. So they created, remember the show MASH? So they created essentially MASH units in France and in Serbia that served civilians, because all of their doctors had gone to the front to help soldiers. So people in villages were left with no medical care. So they set up their own hospitals, all staffed by women doctors who had gone overseas. Again, funded by the pennies and nickels and dimes and, some wealthy people. And then you had American Red Cross, which supplied nurses to these efforts. So none of this was government money. It was all privately funded. So she had 2 employers. American Women's Hospital hired her, but at Near East Relief paid her salary. So that's difficult when you have 2 bosses. So this is her in 1918. That's her passport picture. And she's on the cover of their kind of newsletter for their staff. And so you can see she's the only woman at the table in her uniform. And there were a lot of pictures of her like that, where she was the lone woman representative. So off they went to the Near East, and those blue stars are all areas in which she served across that region over the many years that she was there. But the area that she is probably most well known for is Marash. And Marash is in Turkey today. It's in the mountains at about the 4,000 foot level, absolutely beautiful place. And she was so happy to be there. A Florida kid like me, you see mountains and it's just so majestic because we never see them here. So she wrote letters home. This was another lucky break for me. I found her great niece living in Hope Sound. Not only did she actually know her aunt, Dr. Elliott delivered her and her sister. They were twins. I was like, your great aunt delivered you? She said, yeah, at Good Samaritan Hospital. I was like, she had to be in her mid-70s. But that's what she did, and she also delivered their brother. I was like, that's really keeping it in the family. So she shared with me all the letters that Dr. Elliott had written back to her family, and no one had ever seen them outside the family, and her photo albums of that she had of her exploits. So Mirage was this nice town of 40,000, had a lot of blended people. There were Jewish people, there were Christians, there were Muslims, a little bit of everybody that had somehow managed to survive together. But the Armenians now were slowly returning to the town, and they needed medical care. So she ran this 3-story hospital in Mirage that had been built by the German missionaries in 1907. Nice place, you know, it was a nice sturdy little hospital, and she was very proud of it. And this is her. You'll see her there in the top row with her staff. So her nurses, those in the bottom 2 rows, were all Armenians, young women that she was training with her nurses to be really effective nurses, teaching them English. She had her translator. I don't know if this button thing is going to work, but in the second row, right below her and one person over, was her translator, because obviously she didn't speak Turkish. So she had also an Armenian surgeon who's there on the end. He did all of her major surgeries. So she had a very good unit, and people liked her. People liked serving with her. She was a very quiet leader. So she brought people in, not by yelling and screaming and carrying on, but by really being supportive and creating a family environment. So at this time, the British were in charge of the city, like the security, keep it safe. But things went bad. The French took over, and there was immediate tensions between the French and the Turks. And one day, January 20th, 1920, her hospital came under fire, was riddled with bullets. And the top floor of that hospital was just plaster. It wasn't stone. And the bullets went right through it. And she noted in her diary that I had this little inkwell on my desk, and now it has a bullet hole in it. And here it is. So she saved it, and when her trunk was shipped back, her great-nephew said, I always wondered, but he never had read her diary, and he said, I wondered what that hole was in her inkwell. And then he knew it was from the bullet. And I think it's the only artifact in the United States that has a bullet hole from the Battle of Mirage. And it has its own Wikipedia page. It was the start of the Turkish Revolution. So she started to keep a diary, which I published as this little book, because it's about 15,000 words in length. And the reason that she kept a diary was she thought she was going to die. And she wanted her family to know what had happened in Mirage, because she was really convinced. And one notation she made in her diary, she said, it's good that I'm a soldier's daughter, because she was really difficult situation of keeping all those people, because people had been in the hospital visiting relatives. Well, now they had to stay. They couldn't go out in the streets because they would be shot. And just horrible things that she witnessed. Her pastor that would visit her with his 2 children and the wife was stabbed and shot. The children were stabbed. And the husband was stuck in a house across the street, and they had to go tell him. And the men who told him said they've never seen anybody so grief-stricken, and he drowned himself a few months later. So, I mean, these were really terrible things that were happening. So, the French are in charge, and this is how it looked in February of 1920. The snow had hit Mirage. It's in the mountains. And the French commander came to her hospital, and he was pale. And she's like, what's wrong? And she spoke French. And he said, we're giving up. We're leaving. We're retreating. You have a choice. You can stay and take your chances with the Turks, or you can retreat with us. And the Armenians can as well, your staff. It's your choice. So, what do? You know, you can make a decision for yourself, which she did, which was to leave. but now, what do your staff? And so she had this statement, I think for the rest of my days, I shall suddenly, from time to time, hear that sentence gently said, almost in a whisper, what shall we do now, doctor? I have stood and stared dumbly for minutes at a time in an absolute despair, what to say next. What does she tell these people? So they all decided to retreat. And she packed her staff in a wagon and got them on donkeys. But she decided she was going to walk the 75 miles. She said, maybe I could be of help to some people along the way who need medical assistance. I want to walk because I want to see if I can do it. So they started out on this trek. That's the only photo I could ever find of what it looked like. These people were not equipped for cold weather. They had rags on their feet, shawls. They didn't have heavy coats that they needed, but they knew if they stayed in Marash, they were dead, the Armenians. So about 5,000 left, and they were going to a town that had the train. So this is the way that Armenian mothers typically carried their small children. And Dr. Elliott would be walking the line, and she would see like the little feet sticking out from under the blanket. And she would go up to the kid and tuck the feet in. And then as she felt one child, she felt it and she looked at it, she knew it was dead. It had frozen to death. And so she had to tell the mother, let go, drop the child, it's gone. She did that a lot of times. These were a really tough situation. And then, the end of the third day, which was Friday the 13th, another blizzard had hit, and it was nightfall was coming. Nightfall comes early in winter, and they were lost. She said, they don't know where we are. And they're like, well, maybe we should make camp. And she's like, we have no food, we have no water, we don't have wood to even melt snow. We have to carry on. And then I don't think this is going to have sound, but there's a sound effect that is a train horn. I can try, but I don't think it's going to play. No. Oh, that's what they heard. Cutting through that, you know how snow muffles sound? But they could hear the train whistle. And they went towards it and they found the town. And they get there and it's just mass chaos and there's nothing but cold coffee to drink, but she said, I gulped it. She had such a terrible thirst. So they say, okay, what do we do now? And she's like, well, they were commanded to go up to the barracks. Well, the barracks were at a top of a hill. And she's like, I can't make it. So she tried, she stumbled, fell in the snow. She told the soldiers, just leave me here. Don't say anything, just leave me, I'm comfortable. Because you get to that stage where you're like, I'm done. But instead they carried her up to that hill, and she had frostbite and was exhausted, could not move. But on the second day she was there, she went and found her nurses at the train station, and they were there. But about 2/3 of the Armenians on the trek froze. They were not shot, they were not killed that way, but they froze to death because of the conditions. So after all that, she gathers her 2 nurses, and 2 of her Armenian nurses, she arranged their travel to America and getting them out, because one had family and one she sent to a friend of hers in Michigan who was an attorney, her interpreter. So they couldn't get passage back to America right away. So they did some touring. I mean, why not? They went to the Holy Lands, they went to Europe, they went to France, they went to London. She wrote her first account of what had happened in Marash. And then she comes back to New York, and of course then the train to Florida in May of 1920. And she came at a good time because it was her father's 80th birthday. And so those are her parents in the middle of the photo. And that's not all the kids, because they all couldn't make it. But there's a lot of kids and grandkids there, and that was taken at the Hotel Florida. Next to her, in the kind of, with her hair up, not the brown-haired lady. The brown-haired lady is her sister Beatrice, and that was her closest companion. They lived together off and on their whole lives. But next to her is her sister, who was the doctor, Dr. Pappas. And she was Lake Worth's health officer during World War II when she was 78 years old. So these people really believed in work. So they have the grand family reunion for the father, and they also celebrate the safe homecoming of Dr. Elliott after her extreme ordeal. So this is the Hotel Florida. That's the hotel her brother owned. And it has a kind of a weird place in history because when it was demolished in 1984, it was used in a movie. The movie Harry and Son with Paul Newman. So this is just a still shot of them demolishing the hotel with the wrecking ball. And Paul Newman played the part of the construction worker. It's an okay movie. It's like, you can watch it for free if you want. You'll see a lot of scenes from Lake Worth. But that was her brother's hotel. So she goes back to Michigan and reopens her practice on July 9th, 1920. And as she opens her mail that day, there's a letter from her American Women's Hospital boss, Esther Lovejoy, asking her a question. Would you like to come back to Turkey and Armenia? What do you think she said? She said she was, at this time, she would have been 39. She said yes. In fact, she wrote that very day, I just have a few questions, I'm interested, I want to come back. It's like, why would I feel like I would have been so done, but she wasn't. So she goes back to Turkey and she starts treating these poor little girls, had a terrible eye disease called trachoma. It's a bacterial eye disease that is extremely contagious. It's what they always tested people for who came on ships. If you had trachoma, on the next ship home you were sent. So it causes blindness if left untreated. And they didn't know what caused it then. They had no idea what was causing it. It was common in Appalachia, in this country, among children. So she would treat these girls, but the medical facility was extremely poor. And so she found a building she liked that was being used as a barracks, but it had been a hospital. And she and a lot of workmen completely rebuilt the plumbing. They put in tile. She created, for that time, a really nice hospital. But in this city called Izmit, about 15 miles away, was the front lines of the Turkish-Greco War, Turkey versus Greece. And they were getting closer and closer. And finally, they attacked the town. And there she is again, holed up in her hospital, being fired upon. But this time, the game was a little bit different. So this particular city is on a large gulf. I would call it more of a bay than a gulf, but not as big as the Gulf of Mexico. So right offshore, within viewing distance of her hospital, was a U.S. Navy destroyer. And aboard that ship was an admiral, Mark Bristol. And he gave her a flare gun and said, if they attack your hospital, you fire, they come on your hospital grounds, you fire this flare gun and the Marines will land and protect your hospital. So this was a little different game. Now the U.S. government was trying to stay neutral. So they managed to find boats to evacuate all of her Armenian staff safely from the hospital and their families. But that left her and her nurses alone, under the rule of the Turks. And she was the only doctor in the entire town. Everybody else had left. So she treated their soldiers, she treated Greek soldiers. She didn't care if you were hurt, she helped you get better. But that's not what she came to do in her mission back. She wanted to go to Armenia and care for the orphans. And this is the kinds of orphans that she found. This little boy had been starved to the point where he could no longer straighten his legs because the muscles had contracted. That's what they did to a child. And this boy, she had a follow-up about him because this is probably the most famous photograph of her. They were using her letters and her photos to raise funds. Both organizations were, American Women's Hospital and Near East Relief. So she became very well known. They would take out newspaper ads and issue newsletters to their donors saying, you know, here's an update on what Dr. Elliott is doing. And so she became a world famous person in the early 1920s. And this boy actually recovered. So they were still battling trachoma, and they decided, why don't we put all the kids who have trachoma in one spot? And they did that in a city called Alexandropol in Armenia. These were old Russian Tsar barracks, 170 buildings. And she created what she called her medical factory. It was the world's largest orphanage of 20,000 kids.
Wow.
They fed them, and the milk, you know where they got the milk? From America in cans. So kids would donate milk when you went to the movie theater. Your admission ticket was a can of milk. And so they shipped these thousands and thousands of cans of milk. And the kids, they didn't throw the cans away. The kids made toys out of them. Because that's what kids do. They cut out the pretty labels and made Christmas ornaments. They made clothing out of flour sacks because all the flour came from America for their bread. So they fed the kids, and they also educated them in a trade of some sort. You could be, you know, you could be a mechanic, you could be a woodworker, you could be a rug maker, a seamstress, whatever, agriculture. They just didn't want to feed and say, you know, sit around. They wanted to give these children an education. And that's what they did in Alexandropol. So now Elliott has really been on the move for 3 years. She's tired. So she's invited to a medical conference to speak about her work in the Near East in Switzerland. I mean, that sounds like a good gig, right? So she went to Geneva, and who goes along with her? Her sister Beatrice sails over from America, meets her in Constantinople or Istanbul, and off they go by train to Geneva, and then on to Venice, right? They're having a lovely vacation in Venice. 4 days into the vacation, a horrible thing happens. There is a city on the Greek coast that's now called Izmit, but at that time was called Smyrna. And the Turks lit the entire city ablaze, and that was the burning of Smyrna. There's a man, his name was George Horton, and he was the consul there for America. And he said, what I saw in Smyrna made me ashamed that I was a member of the human race. Because these hundreds of thousands of people went to the harbor and sat on the rocks because they had nowhere to go. It's a coastal town. And the only ship that rescued anybody, the U.S. didn't rescue anybody, because that would have been showing that they weren't neutral, was a Japanese freighter. Took out people to a nearby island and would go pick up more people and just started transporting them. So within 4 hours, Elliott and her sister were on their way to Athens to see what they could do to help. So she set up hospitals all over the Grecian Isles. Hundreds of beds of hospitals. And this is expensive, right? This is not cheap for her organization or any of them. But she said it has to be done. These people, they're dying 1,000 a day. This has to stop. So she was brave, and she made a decision that we are going to help. You know, she would have to cable New York and ask permission, and then she wouldn't hear from them. So she just did it. And her most remembered thing that American Women's Hospital ever did was run a quarantine station on a small rocky island, because Greece said, look, we'll take the refugees, but they have to be screened for illness. They have smallpox. They have typhus. We can't have these diseases spreading among all our people, so if we could screen them in an isolated area, and if they're healthy, then we'll assign them to a refugee camp. And so she organized this and ran it as well. Now, of course, it was a big fundraising boon for both organizations, and they would always fight, because technically at this time she was really only officially working for American Women's Hospitals. So her boss hightailed it as much as you could in those days. By ship, her boss is on the end, Dr. Lovejoy. And Dr. Lovejoy's assistant worked with Dr. Elliott in Greece, Mrs. Cruikshank. And you are at a great peril when you outshine your boss, right? And it wasn't Dr. Lovejoy getting the headlines, it was Dr. Elliott. So you always have a little bit of worry. But the Greek government recognized what she had done, and they gave her 3 medals. Number 1, the one in the middle, is the Greek War Cross. She was the first woman in the history of Greece ever awarded a Greek War Cross. She was also given the silver and the gold crosses of St. George for helping Greek soldiers when she was at her various hospitals treating them. So they recognized her work very nicely. But she began to get an idea. The other organization, Near East Relief, said, look, what if we took your siege diary, this book, and you would add the other things that happened to you. You could write a memoir. And I think her initial, I don't know this, I always picture her a little bit like, if you remember Star Trek with Dr. McCoy, I could picture her saying, damn it, I'm a doctor, not a novelist. I could see her saying this. But she said, I'll do it. And I think it was because she was ready to leave American Women's Hospitals. So she said, what do I care? So this book, which was originally, its original title was Children of Ararat. It got changed to Beginning Again at Ararat, was one of the first things I read. It was published in 1924. And I could see her diary, because I had read that, and I could see her stories. But the back end of the book was a complete history of Armenia and really of Christianity. And I was like, when did she do this research? In between being shot at? So it left a quandary in my head, like, when was this book written? So the book company was still in business after 150 years, Revell, and they're still in business. So I wrote them, and they said, we have no information, the book's out of print, sorry we can't help you, whatever. And something told me, that's not right. So I found a woman who wrote the company's history. And I emailed her. Within 2 hours, she emailed me back. She's like, they have the contracts, and I know who has them. I'm emailing her right now. And within that very day, I had the contract. And guess what? There's 2 names on it. She's listed as author, but someone else is listed as proprietor. And she was this person, Rose Wilder Lane. You know her, but I doubt anybody else in this room knows who this is. Right? But every single one of you knows her mother.
Walnut Grove.
Yes, her mother was Flora Ingalls Wilder. That was my gotcha. So, I'm like, what in God's blazes is Laura Ingalls Wilder's daughter doing in Armenia? So it turns out that her daughter, Rose, we'll go back to her, was the writer in the family. She was a newspaper correspondent in San Francisco. She had already written several novels and several biographies. So essentially, they were assigned to work together. She worked for Near East Relief in publicity. So she was that person that was writing that, those appeals to get money. She was very good at that. So they sent her to Athens, and her and Dr. Elliott worked 6 months on the book. And I even know the exact dates because Rose Wilder Lane's diaries are in the National Archives. So they sent them to me, and it's like, work with Dr. Elliott today, work to do it. I was like, aha! So they did. And guess who wasn't happy about this when they found out? Her boss. So remember I said Mrs. Cruikshank was her watchdog, and she cabled back, Elliott's here writing a book with someone else. And Lovejoy went nuts. Lovejoy herself was an author, and she was going to write a memoir about the work that the organization was doing. And now Mabel was going to beat her to the press. So Dr. Lovejoy took a motion to the American Women's Hospital Executive Board. We forbid you from publishing your memoir. Oh, no. You are forbidden. Guess what Elliott did? My resignation submitted effective immediately. That was it. She was done with American Women's Hospitals. And NER, the other organization, Near East Relief, hired her immediately, and all the nurses quit American Women's Hospital. And they were all hired by the other organization. So now we have this war going on, and this made the headlines, not the headlines, but it was on the front page of the New York Times, this battle. Because everybody is like, what do you mean did she quit? Like, why would she quit? So it was a great sore spot. So Dr. Elliott came home, and she went on a book tour that toured the Northeast and the Midwest. So she would speak at churches. This particular one is a church in Brooklyn, I believe. She spoke at colleges and universities. She spoke before state legislatures. She spoke in banquet halls. So these were all fundraising efforts. And the agreement, the way they settled it, was that the two organizations split the proceeds from her book tour. So that was the way to make peace in the land. But she was not going to be told that I cannot tell my own story. And so essentially, and Esther Lovejoy, who, by the way, I don't like. Okay, I don't know if I was clear on that. She stayed as chairman of American Women's Hospital until she was 97 years old. So that alone kind of describes the personality of her. And I read her, someone wrote a biography, a professor in Oregon, where she was from, wrote her biography in 2012. And she waited until 5 pages before the end of the book to say, oh, you know, in reality, she wasn't very nice. So it was interesting dealing with that. So what's Elliott going to do now? Does she go back to Michigan? She been there, done that. So she took an appointment teaching at the Women's Medical College in Philadelphia, which was the first, one of the first, I think there was one that beat it, but it was the main hospital or the main medical program that just trained women doctors. That's all they took. So she was a professor of pediatrics. She had been offered the presidency of the medical college in Constantinople, but then she's like, I have to interact with all my dear friends. So she didn't take that. She was offered positions in India and other places. But this time, somebody would not take no for an answer for her. And this man who ran a hospital in Tokyo, his name was Rudolph Balling Teusler. He was from Rome, Georgia, and he had been in Tokyo since 1900. So it's now 1925. And he contacted her and he said, I have a job for you. This was the hospital that he had built. Nice little building, but something terrible happened in Tokyo in 1923. I'll tell you how his hospital looked. There. The Great Kanto earthquake had hit, and that was bad enough, but then they had incredible fires, because, you know, Tokyo was not the Tokyo you know today. It was mostly wooden buildings, and there was incredible fires, incredible tsunamis that had destroyed what the earthquake didn't. So he knew one person who would be able to do well in this situation, and that was Mabel Elliott. So he said, would you come? And she said, yes, I will. So off she goes now to the Far East, which I think you know, that's Japan. And immediately she has an issue, which was not her fault. So the law had changed in Japan. Before this time, if you had an American MD graduation, you were automatically licensed to practice in Japan by virtue of that credential. Well, they had changed the law, and now you were required to pass the imperial examination. And she did it with an interpreter. It's not like they expected her to learn Japanese. But you see that one on the bottom? She did it with high honors. So she is, in history, the first American women doctor to be licensed in Japan. And this is the actual license. This was among her papers. And her family didn't know what it said. And I didn't know what it said until I used Google Translate. And I'm like, oh my God, it's her medical license. And I could, you know, clearly read it. So I had to use Google Translate for a lot of the things that I got from Japan, from the hospital that she worked at. So this is her and her medical team. She worked, the woman beside her is Christine Nunno, who was her nurse in Greece. And they had gotten, along so well and been through a lot together that she rehired, said, "You want to come to Japan with me?" And she's like, "Yep." So off they went together to Japan. And the three women in the front were Japanese, but they had been trained in America. That's a Japanese doctor in the middle and two nurses. So they also acted as translators. So they began, as that was their team, and they wanted to make their part of Tokyo. Tokyo was huge. It was a big city then, and it's cut up in kind of like wards, like New York. So in their ward, they wanted to make it a demonstration center of how they were going to transform preventative care in Japan and how kids were cared for. So in Japan, you went to the doctor when you're like, okay, I think they're going to die. I think we should go to the doctor now. That was medical care. So they would take kids to the doctor, and it's like, well, you can't do anything now. So the infant mortality rate, Japan had the highest infant mortality rate in the world, 20%. So she's like, we got a lot of work to do here. So they had some ideas that came from America. These are not things she invented. And they were really centered around two things. Number one, a well baby clinic. So women could bring their infants into the clinic. They'd weigh them. What are you feeding the child? You can't just feed your baby white rice. It will die if you do that, because it will get a very, well, I should have said not very, because it will get beriberi syndrome, which is what happens when you have no thiamine. And they didn't know that, why people die when they eat only white rice. So that was one thing. The other thing was a visiting nurses association. And Christine Nunno personally designed their uniforms to look professional. And people who were experts on Japanese culture said, oh no, they're not going to let strangers in their house to tell them how to raise their child. Well, they did. And she said the only complaint they ever had was when they forgot to go to a next door neighbor, and they were very hurt that the nurse had not stopped at their house too. So as if women had this innate knowledge to automatically know how to care for an infant. They didn't. So they taught them things on nutrition and, not to take your baby strapped to your back in these hot baths like they did. That's not how you bathe a baby. So simple things like that is what they stress. And within 4 years, they had cut that infant mortality rate to 5%. Still very high, but not 20%. So she also introduced the diphtheria vaccine to Japan. And diphtheria for babies is especially dangerous and can be fatal. And so she got a company in Canada to donate thousands of doses. And then the hospital that she worked in was an Episcopally funded hospital. So they would have drives, give for St. Luke's International Hospital in Japan, and, pass the can around a hospital or church services in America. So this was Dr. Teusler's dream, was to build a world-class hospital in Tokyo that served everybody. This was not just for Americans. She designed herself the 6th floor of that hospital, and it was the first pediatric ward in Japan, in any hospital. So she had the beds were not white, they were painted yellow and green, and to take the kids into surgery, instead of putting them on a stretcher, she had a little wagon that she had them paint a face on. So it was like a special thing, and the kid would not be scared. So she designed that, and this was taken in 1934, and Teusler dies. He just literally had worked himself to death at age 58. But she stayed on. So the way it worked with Japan is you would work 4 years and then get a year off to go home, take some further study. So she would go to Johns Hopkins and do some brush up, or she went to Europe, looked at hospitals, and she would typically travel with her sister Beatrice. So she stayed in Japan until 1941, which is probably a date you would expect, because things were going bad. And she saw it's tough in Japan. She survived 2 coup attempts in Japan, because the army barracks were very close to her house, and she was very afraid that they would just run through there and kill the Americans. And one night was very fateful. for her, but nothing happened, obviously. As I said, St. Peter never called her name when she was overseas, which was good. So that hospital still exists. It was not lost in the bombings of Tokyo. The Army used it afterward, and it has, again, they don't use this building anymore they use it for administrative now, because they built this huge skyscraper hospital that they use now for that. So if you're ever in Tokyo and you're sick, go to St. Luke's, so you'll be taken care of. So this is the little boy there on the end, is the little boy that she saved his life. That's John Welburn. And his father, who's in the dark suit, was the rector of the church and had gone to the hospital, and no one in the family is quite sure. They think it was some sort of kidney ailment, but nobody was sure what exactly his problem was. And it was the little boy's son, Mike, who wrote that Facebook post. So he sent me this photo of Dr. Elliott. And so when Mike, or that guy John Jr., grew up, she kept in touch with him, and he became an engineer. And he's like, I don't know, and this was in the early 50s, like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. And she said, why don't you come to West Palm Beach? It's a growing place. And guess what business he went in? The best business, and you just heard it go on. The air conditioning business. So everybody was either getting air conditioning for their first time, retrofitted in their home, or new houses were having air conditioning built in for the first time. And he was considered to be one of the top contractors in the state, and was partnered with John Cassidy and Company, which is still in business in Palm Beach County. So he carried on to Orlando, and then he retired. But his son said, I remember Dr. Elliott because one day, after her sister died, and her sister died on her birthday, on her own birthday. Dr. Elliott was going to go in and wish her happy birthday, and her sister, who was 4 years older, had died. So now she was the last surviving child of the 14. So Mr. Welburn, John Welburn, said, why don't you come live in our cottage on the property? It's like, they lived off the intercoastal. We have a little mother-in-law cottage. Come live with us. So she did. And she said one day, the Mike Welburn, he wrote me, he said, I had this big thorn in my foot. So she grabs a pair of pliers, and she grabs his foot, and she starts explaining, well, let me tell you how I'm going to do this, and it's not going to hurt. And then she just pulls it out. And he's like, I wasn't expecting that. And she said, that's right. So that was her, but they were all children when they had memories of her. So in 1941, in October, she sailed back to America because the church had ordered all the doctors and nurses out. They had to leave. So she came back to West Palm Beach, and she told her reporter, I'm going to go dig in my garden, and I'm going to have a good time. Well, that didn't last very long. So she goes to New York, and she works full-time for 3 years, examining missionaries returning from overseas for the Episcopal Church. So there's where she was. So now we're in the late 40s. She comes back again to West Palm Beach and is having a good time. But every summer in the 1950s, she went to a place called Penny Farms. Has anyone ever heard of it? So it was started by J.C. Penney, the department store guy. It's near Jacksonville, and it was a community for retired clergy. So they could go there and live, and they had their own built-in medical care. So she would sub for the regular doctor when he took his summer vacation. She would work there for 3 months and provide medical care. So that picture's 1958. So she's like 78 years old in that picture. I mean, she looks very fit in that one. So this is her in 1960 in the church newsletter for Holy Trinity Church in West Palm Beach. So her and her sister had also lived across the street from the church in some apartments, and she was very active in Holy Trinity. If you've never been in that church, it is absolutely gorgeous. But time got Dr. Elliott, as it will get us all, and she died in 1968 at the age of 87. And it certainly was a full life. And she has a window at Holy Trinity. And it depicts 3 healing miracles from the Bible. And this was one of her favorite expressions. She ended a letter with this expression: great life if you don't weaken. And when you think about it, it's a very powerful statement about a lot of things. You will have a great life if you don't weaken. And you can weaken about a lot of stuff. And it's not her line, so it's not her quote she made up. It was a popular catchphrase of the time, of the late teens. So, what was the point of all of this? You know, like what? This is one of my favorite pictures of her reflection. So she's kind of looking at us in this picture. So to me, if you don't think one person can change the world in a good way, she is your person who did that. We know all kinds of examples of people who changed the world in a bad way, but how one person can decide, this is how my life, and we all can't be Dr. Elliott. You know, I mean, that'd be nice, but we can't. She was extremely brave, and I'm sure she was scared at times. But the perseverance, the not taking no for an answer, I think are qualities that are so important to our world today. Like, what is the lesson that you take? And I'll read you writing the last chapter of this book was the hardest thing I have ever written in my life. I cried a lot that day because it's like almost like I didn't want it to end, but in a way I did want it to end because it was a lot of work. But I wrote this line: may her story inspire generations to serve with the same fearless heart. So that's what my hope is for this work, is that it can say to someone, to all of us in here, you know, do something tomorrow to help someone in need. It doesn't have to be great and monumental and you're not a doctor. Whatever, do something to help someone in this world. So, questions on my quest. I tell people I was hijacked in May of 2024 by her, but it was a good hijacking because it's very addictive. And one day someone said, "Oh, you're so obsessed." And I was like, initially I was like, "Whoa, that's not a nice thing." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's probably true." I'll take that. I'll take that. So, I don't know why I was selected for this mission. I don't think I'm a very likely person, but you just never know why you get picked. Question, we had one there and then there.
What year was the Florida Hotel built?
So they bought the Florida Hotel in 1914, and I think it had been built the year before. It was just a one-story place. And then her brother had it completely remodeled to the tune of $75,000. And then he lost it in the Depression. He got a foreclosure. So, but it was originally a one-story. I don't know what the original title was, but I found in the Lake Worth Herald when they bought it. So initially his father bought it because he had run a lot of hotels in his time. And so then his son took it over when he got too old. Question?
Two quick questions. Where was the Holy Trinity Church that you said?
The Holy Trinity Church is in West Palm Beach on Phillips Point.
Okay.
So it's it used to be pink and now it looks like it's going to be a white building. They just put where the Christian Scientist Church is very near there. It's on Trinity. It's absolutely, it just turned 100 I think 2 years ago. But it has beautiful windows. Her window is in the staircase to the bell tower, but you can see it from the landing. But it's really a lovely church. Harvey and Clark, which are very famous architects, designed it.
And when she wrote the book, her memoirs that caused her to have to leave
Yes.
the hospital, so did she not get money from that, or just
I
not
don't
from
know, because Rose Wilder Lane was the one who signed the contract. Now, they may have had, my guess is, if I were to, and this is just a guess, I think she didn't want anything. I don't think she took any money from it. I think
she
she
have
said,
any money, do you know?
she had, when she died, she still owned her house and she was renting it out. And I believe that was her only real asset. I mean, she had enough money to live through the years. She did okay on her. I mean, you know what her salary was when she was overseas in the Near East? It's $2,500 a year, which is the equivalent of about $35,000. That's not a lot of money for what you were, the number of hours that you were working. So, But I think later on, I don't know what her salary was in the Episcopal Church in Tokyo. And my guess is you kind of got all your expenses paid, so she probably didn't have to pay rent. She probably didn't have to pay for food. So you can kind of bank your, it's almost like being in the army to some degree. And then they would pay for your passage home, which was expensive. I mean, a trip back to America was $300 to $500. Well, you can times that times 15 to figure out what the ship fare was. So it was not cheap. It was not cheap.
Did you bring some books to sell?
Of course. I got books. So I do, yes.
I want to thank you very much. That was phenomenal, the presentation.
Thank you. You know, it was, a lot of people didn't understand me writing this book because they're like, well, that's not what you write, you know? And I'm like, I can't understand it always either, but I had to tell the story. And what really baffled me is all the stupid things that people write dissertations about in this world and look for topics that no one ever wrote about her in a dissertation, like her as the topic. She was mentioned in one, but never the subject of one, never the subject of an article after her death. She was mentioned in articles, but that was it. And I was like, how does that happen? How does her life just, you know, and her family, I mean, they were very, very lovely. Took me 5 months to build trust because they didn't know who the hell I was. I mean, or what I was going to do with her letters. And it was cool. Like, how do you write letters when you have that many brothers and sisters? You can't possibly write everybody. So she would write the main letter in longhand, you know. She would send it to her sister Beatrice, who worked in the hotel. And in the hotel, they had a mimeograph machine. So her sister would type it on, I think everybody in here knows what mimeograph is, right? So she would type it on the stencils, and then she'd run off the copies. And then she would send it to all the brothers and sisters. She would write individual letters to her mother. And then all of her professional correspondence was at Drexel University, like the telegram that I showed you. So they shared all of their archives with me, which was very, very generous. So, yeah, I created a Facebook page for her to share photos, and within a day, I get a message from someone in Australia, and I'm like, Australia? And it was an Armenian researcher who said, oh, I have followed her for years. And then I found a film on YouTube that was about what had happened in Marash, and a man had filmed many of the children when they were very old, and he had put together a documentary. So I emailed him because he had Elliott in the film. So he's like, you're not going to believe this. I just talked about her yesterday to my pastor. I said, whoa, the lines are going here. So really, really, and there are a lot of, I keep finding more Elliots, you know. Yes.
What's the reception like? I mean, how are they feeling about your work?
I think good. I think I don't think they were thrilled at first with finding about the co-author, but you know, I was okay with it because I knew her siege diary, and she is, you know, they're different writers. It's like to say, this writer is this way, and that was like, when I read her book, I'm like, wow, this is like not like her usual stuff. To me, I wasn't real happy with the book because it was like so deep, and I was like, oh, this is like so odd because it's so different than the way her usual, what I call in the moment style. You are there with her. It's very exciting writing. And I was like, So I knew something, and I thought it was the publishing company had rewritten her stuff, never imagining that there was a second author, and never imagining that it was Laura Ingalls Wilder's daughter. Which brings us to the Little House books. There are several people, several scholars of English, who have studied the books and have said they were not written by Laura Ingalls Wilder. They were written by Rose Wilder Lane. So I'm not an English scholar, but that upsets, because you know, Laura Ingalls Wilder has an intensely rabid fan base to this day. You know, they're coming out with a new series on Netflix.
No.
Yes, next year. So it supposedly will stick to the books, which the TV series never did. That was Michael Landon's Fantasyland. So supposedly, you know, there were 6, 7 books in the original series, and that's what they say they're going to stick to that storyline. So Rosewater Lane is a very beautiful write. I mean, I wish I could write like she does, because it's very, I think almost all her books are in public domain, but then she becomes famous for something else. She was a political theorist. She and Ayn Rand and Isabel Patterson are considered the mothers of libertarianism. So she was another very strong-willed woman. I mean, who goes to buy them? Then she goes and lives in Albania. I mean, Albania? She lives in the late 20s. So when she was told that she had to sign up to get a social security number, she took that card and flung it at the postmaster. I am not filling this out. I do not want anything from the government. Thank you. So the postmaster reported her to the FBI. The FBI agent shows up at her house in Connecticut. And she says, "What is this, the Gestapo?" Was her reaction. And she wrote a newspaper article with that title. So she was a very much out there person as well. Very interesting woman. If you even read her Wikipedia page, she was very fascinating. So that was my year. Thank you very much. Yes, question.
How did she manage through the influenza epidemic?
She got the Spanish flu. She got it and was very, very ill. She couldn't work for at least a month. And she finally went off to Wisconsin and camped for 2 weeks because she thought the clean air and cold air will cure me. And I guess apparently it did. She didn't die from it. She was only sick once overseas. She had dysentery, which is not a fun thing. But that was the only time, and she didn't get typhus. So typhus killed more aid workers than anything. Typhus is very deadly, and it's spread by body lice. So that was
Thank you.
Thank you.